We're in Hebrews chapter 12. We'll be picking up in verse 25 tonight. Somewhat a review of the context in which we are reading these verses and studying these verses, and coupling with that, perhaps illustration to help us grasp the impression, I suppose, that the writer is placing upon his readers. We enjoy live events from time to time, whether it is a sporting event and or a performance of some sort. And there's a great difference. There's a difference in the effect that is impressed upon us, whether we are merely hearing this take place or whether we're merely watching this take place on a television or our devices, versus if we are at the event and in the presence of the environment. And there's a greater effect when you consider how many more of our senses are involved in that live event, whether it's a football game, a baseball game. I believe Andy likes F1 racing, and Brother Jerry likes NASCAR. I don't know that he would want to go to a live event of NASCAR, but I like to watch straight line racing, drag racing. And it's very different than looking at it on a screen versus being there, hearing it in person, feeling it in person, like a band that is playing. A live show by a band, it's very different than just listening to the audio. It has a different impact on the senses. That's why I didn't go to that. I heard there was a squirrel problem down there, so I'm afraid of squirrels. So is Carson Beck, apparently. All right, back on track. All of these senses are involved in these live events. And when you look back to the occasion that the Hebrews writer brings up to the minds of his readers, he reminds them of the occasion when their forefathers, who received the law of Moses, were at the Mount Sinai, and how that they were at a mountain that could be touched in the sense that it was a physical mountain, but when you consider at that moment they could not touch it when God was revealing His presence and His glory and the words that He would give to Moses, and He says it burned with fire. And I cannot imagine the senses that may have been involved. There was blackness, there was darkness or gloominess, there was a tempest, great wind, perhaps even to the point of like a tornado or a hurricane that we have maybe experienced or been familiar with. There's a great difference between seeing these things from afar, hearing about these things, versus actually being in that occasion. He says, we've not come to that. That caused great fear upon those who were there on that day with Moses. And the fear was important for them to understand the seriousness of sin, the importance for them to consider God's word. But he says, we're not there. We have come to Mount Zion. We are at the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, verse 23, which are written in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling, that speaketh better things than that of Abel. There is something even far greater and than even any of the five senses. Now, we are subject, we live in this body. This is where God has placed us, and it is in this body that we learn of this kingdom that we are in. It is in this body that we learn of the covenant, the new covenant. It is in this kingdom that we, and upon the earth, that we learn of salvation through Christ. But this is all looking to a greater body, a greater place where the kingdom will be, and all looking to that spiritual home of heaven. One commentator who I was listening to not too long ago on this chapter of Hebrews said that he didn't like to talk physical and spiritual because we get into this mindset of thinking of real and not real. Well, I want to use physical and spiritual and help us understand they are both real, and help us understand that the spiritual is real, and that God has shown us time and again that He is a spiritual being. He is spirit, and He is very real, and the place which we long to be is very real, and the church of which we are able to be a part is rooted far more in the spiritual, even so than the law of Moses was. Did the law of Moses involve spiritual things? Absolutely. But it was also far more earthly, far more carnal in its nature. It did not save from sin. Now, it taught them how to avoid sin, but it did not take away their sins the way that the blood of Christ does. What questions or comments? See that you refuse not him that speaketh, verse 25. See that you refuse not him that speaketh. This continuation of the phrase that he uses in verse 24, where it says, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaketh better things than that of Abel. So the focus now is on Jesus. And that's what the Hebrews writer is trying to do throughout, and has done throughout this letter, is to point the Jewish Christians who had a great affection for Moses and his law, the old covenant, which that was what they grew up with. That was all the traditions that were involved with that were ingrained in them. That was what they were comfortable with. And now that they have embraced this new way of life of Christianity, where they didn't have to go to this physical temple, they didn't have to offer the blood of bulls and goats, they didn't do all of these things that they grew up doing, but it's very different. Not only is it different, they're being persecuted because of it. They are losing friendships, family members. They are being rejected. Maybe they are losing money because they are Christians. And so he constantly reminds them, helps them to see, and helps us to see that Jesus is far better than Moses, that the new covenant is far better than the old covenant, that it is the very fulfillment of the purpose for giving the old covenant to begin with, was to point to Jesus and point to his covenant. So he says, see not that you refuse him that see that you refuse not him that speaketh. Again, turning back to, or looking back to, where he says that Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, to the blood of sprinkling that speaketh better things than that of Abel. What does the blood of Abel speak? What kinds of things does Abel teach us, his life? You go back to Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 4. By faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. So even though Abel is dead, even though Abel has shed blood, he continues to speak. He continues to teach us some things. What kinds of things come to your mind when you think about what Abel teaches us? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the first point I have there, is the importance of obedience. Um, and again, going back to Hebrews 11, verse 4, that he shows, he teaches us the importance of obedience, but also connected to another thing you said there. In his obedience, what was he doing? He was offering the more excellent worship, the more excellent gift. It was more excellent because it was by faith. It was according to what God had said. And so there is the importance of obeisance, if you will, that is worshiping God the way that God would have us to worship him. John 4:23 and 24. So we see the importance of obedience. We see the importance of worship. And this is with uh, the first children that were, or first individuals who were born into the world. Adam and Eve were created, but you have Cain and Abel who were the first to be born in this world. And Abel teaches us, so it goes, he's reaching back even before Moses and saying, Abel still teaches us some things, but there's one that lived and has always lived even before Abel, and that's who he's pointing us to. So Abel teaches us the importance of obedience, the importance of obeisance or worship. We also see there the reality of God's vengeance, that he will avenge the righteous. You remember he tells Cain that the blood of his brother was crying out to him from the earth. That God will avenge the righteous and he will punish the guilty. Going back to the verse that we noted tonight in our devotional in Romans 11 verse 22, behold therefore the goodness and severity of God. Behold therefore the kindness and the cutting off of God. To those who are faithful, he's going to show kindness. He's going to show his goodness. To those who are unfaithful, who will not hear him, he will punish. He will cut off. And then also another thing that we're taught in the life of Abel, and from his death, even though he is dead, he still speaks, is the reality of man's grievance, that we suffer even when we're striving to do what is right. We can suffer in this life, and we do suffer in this life. James 5 and verse 11 reminds us of the patience of Job. But here we're thinking about Abel and what he teaches us, the importance of obedience, the importance of worship, the importance of the reality of God's vengeance, and the reality of man's grievance. But Jesus, by his blood and his covenant, speaks far better things even than that of Abel. Because Jesus and his blood and his covenant brings salvation, teaches us of salvation, brings glory. Ultimately, all the glory belongs to God, but we have within that idea that we are worshiping, when we worship our God, we are giving glory to him, that we are able to glorify him. Jesus and his covenant teaches us mercy, and it teaches us healing. As we think about mercy, there is the reality that God will avenge the righteous and he will punish the guilty. But when you think about God's mercy, when you think about the mercy that is shown to us by the shedding of Jesus' blood in his new covenant, you recognize that even those who are guilty can receive his mercy if they will turn to him. We find that in Jesus. And then also healing. While we think about the physical suffering that we're taught in the life of Abel and the death of Abel, we think about the spiritual healing that Jesus, his blood, and his covenant bring. So Jesus speaks far better things than that of Abel. Therefore, he says, he doesn't say therefore, but connecting with that, he says, see that you refuse not him that speaketh. Where did the Hebrews writer begin this letter? Go back to Hebrews 1. God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in time past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down on the right hand of the majesty on high, being made so much better than the angels, as he hath by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. So the Hebrews writer begins with a referring back to what has been spoken, how that God has spoken to man, and what a blessing that is. But now he is speaking to us by his Son, the one to whom he's constantly pointing them to, that is Jesus. And so here now in chapter 12, coming closer and closer to the end of his letter, he says, do not refuse him who speaks. Do not refuse him, that is Jesus. For if they escaped not who refused him that spake on earth, who is that? What is it? Okay, Jesus is the one he's saying is speaking now, that we need not refuse. But then he's going to make a reference back to, for if they escape not who refused him that spake on earth. Who, again, the idea of that earthly leader, that earthly law that they received before. Those who were bound by the law of Moses, we're talking about Moses here, if they escape not who refused him that spake on earth. When those who lived under the law of Moses, and even living in the days of Moses especially, if they rejected what he said, or if they rejected him, was there punishment for them? In fact, we can go back and look at a number of occasions of punishment happening before their eyes because of their disobedience under the law of Moses. One such occasion was before the law was entirely given. God instructs Moses to go back to the people. They were had grown impatient and unthankful, and began to worship, made themselves an idol, and worshipped in an idolatrous way. But also you find many other places where they were punished because of their disobedience, punished for not following the laws that were given to them, whether it was how they were taking up the manna that they had received and the quail that they had received. There was a certain way they were to do that, or whether it was their respect for Moses and those who were in authority. There were those who spoke out against him, that God opened up the earth. I'm thinking about the sons of Kohath. God opened up the earth to swallow them up because of their rejection of Moses and his law on that occasion. You could think about the occasion in which Miriam and Aaron were struck with leprosy, or Miriam in particular. Yes, they were both struck with leprosy because of that, speaking against Moses and speaking against his wife. We could refer back to the occasion of the serpents, the fiery serpents, venomous serpents who were biting the people, and Moses held up the golden serpent in order to save them. They had to look at that serpent in order to save them. A number of occasions we could refer back to where they did not escape if they refused what Moses said. So how much more, he says, how much more? So do not refuse the words of Jesus. They save us, James 1:21, the engrafted word is able to save our souls. Jesus' words will judge us, John 12 and verse 48. And as we note, those who are bound by the words of Moses did not escape if they refused to obey them. He was the one who spake on earth there, but much more. Again, referring back to this reality that Jesus is better, Jesus is greater, Jesus is purer, Jesus is more powerful, than anything that Moses could provide. And if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven, as it will be termed here in verse 25, well, then there is no hope. There is no salvation. It is a far worse punishment, and there is no escape. Yes. Yes, that's referring back to the occasion that. So you got the have you got a capitalization New King James? Mm-hmm. In for if they escape not who refused him that spake on earth, and the second him there you've got a capitalization. Okay. Um, that could be now truly. What is it? Um, First of all, the capitalization is by the publisher, so that would be their interpretation as to whether that's referring to a figure of deity or not. Apparently, they believe that it is. So, if that be the case, that's another something to think about. Uh, Moses speaking on earth was not by Moses' own design, was it? So we could say that Moses speaking on earth was God speaking on earth because he gave the words to Moses. But I think within the context, the comparison that's being made here is the earthly servant. Now Jesus came to earth, but he is the heavenly servant, if you will. He is the greater servant of the two, and his message and his covenant. Again, the law of Moses also came from heaven. But there's a comparison being made, or a contrast being made between the law of Moses and the law of Christ, the old covenant and the new covenant. And so that's what we're seeing here. So whether the hymn there refers to God speaking on earth through Moses, or whether it is speaking to of Moses himself, um, is not a major matter there, as long as we understand that Moses did not design the law of Moses by his own doing. It was from God. But how much more shall not we escape if we turn away from him that speaketh from heaven? Again, this concept that uh, the new covenant, the New Testament, the law of Christ is far better. It's a time and again in Paul's writings, you see a contrast of the flesh and the spirit. You see a contrast of that which is earthly or carnal versus that which is spiritual or heavenly. And we're seeing that similar contrast here, comparing the old law, which is more carnal, to the new law, which is more spiritual in nature. Thinking about he who speaks from heaven, I want to go back to Matthew chapter 16 for a moment. Beginning at verse 13, we see that when Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" And they said, "Some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He saith unto them, "But whom say ye that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered and said unto him, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Herein is one of those extremely important passages where we find uh, several important realities and facts concerning Jesus and his church, that he is the Christ. He says to Peter, you didn't learn that from flesh and blood. You didn't learn that on the earth. That's from my Father who is in heaven, who has revealed that to you. And then he goes on to say, Peter, you are Peter. He gives him that special name, which means a small pebble. And upon this rock, this giant, unmovable bedrock, I will build my church. Peter is the small pebble that will be moved around in his life and needs to allow God to move him around. And Jesus was going to build the solid foundation, was going to build his church upon a solid foundation, the foundation that he is the Christ, the Son of the living God, which is a heavenly message. And the church would have a heavenly message given to it. Specifically within the context, speaking to his apostles, he says, I give you the keys of the kingdom, that's authority to enter, and authority to open up to others. And whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. This is a peculiar arrangement in the English, and when we read it on the surface, it's not easy for us to grasp. Many have wrested this to mean something that does not, such as the teaching that the Catholic Church holds, that whatever the Pope decides or the church decides on earth, well then heaven's going to go along with it. Heaven's going to be okay with it because that's what they have bound, whether they bind it or loose it. And I remember many years ago, I've told you about Brother Larry Fryer, who spent many years in Sri Lanka, but he, in some of his travels, one time was speaking with someone high up in the Catholic Church. I don't know if it was an archbishop, somewhere high up in the hierarchy, and he asked them their position on homosexuality, and they said, we haven't decided yet. So that's not what Jesus was saying in verse 19 of Matthew 16. He was not saying that the church has authority in and of itself to make laws and then heaven's going to go along with it. No, but that the church receives its laws from heaven. Brother Dan Cates has done an excellent job. Not his ability there supersedes my ability. He was able to diagram this and to show that what Jesus means here is that whatever you are binding on earth has already been bound in heaven. Whatever you are binding or loosing on earth has already been loosed in heaven, showing that what they are going to be preaching, what they are going to be teaching, that it is from heaven. Going back to now what the Hebrews writer says, that Jesus speaks from heaven. Now, under the old law, you have an earthly message, those who had to obey even under the law of Moses. But now he says, you're under the law of him who speaks from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth. And therein is a powerful thought, as we are reminded that Jesus is God. And that when we think about him pre-incarnate, that is, before he took on flesh, we oftentimes refer to him as the second person of the Godhead. John called him the Word in John 1. There's the reality that he was there when the law was given to Moses. Perhaps referring to his eternality here, that the Jesus that they're wanting to leave, that he was involved in the giving even of the law of Moses, and now he is giving a far greater message. He shook the earth then, but now he hath promised, saying, yet once more I will shake not the earth only, but also the heavens. And this word, yet once more, signifieth the removing of those things that are shaken, as of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Wherefore, we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. So he says, whose voice then shook the earth, but now he hath promised, saying, yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also heaven or the heavens. So continuing with this thought of comparing, showing them the inferior nature of the old covenant and impressing upon them the superior nature of the new covenant, he references again that occasion which when God spoke, Exodus 19 and verse 18, the earth trembled and the people were afraid. He shook the earth. And then he references prophecy in Haggai chapter 2 and verse 6. Haggai chapter 2 and verse 6. And here he recites from there and saying, yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also the heavens. Someone read for us Haggai 2 and verse 6.
For thus saith the Lord of hosts, yet once, in a little while, I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land.
All right. So there, in a message that was primarily directed to Judah, the Israelites, and more specifically, as you continue, you'll read words given to Zerubbabel, who would be one who would bring a part of the people back to Jerusalem from captivity. He makes reference to this shaking of not the earth only, but also the heavens and the seas and the dry lands. And the Hebrews writer recites that verse and makes application to now as being those who are in the kingdom of Christ, those who are under the new covenant. He says, what this signifies, the yet once more signifies the removing of those things that are shaken, as of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. So what does this mean? You got to come back Sunday to find out. Two thoughts and questions. Is this a reference to Jesus' final coming, in which it is the fact that those things, that everything will be shaken, everything that is made will be removed? 2 Peter 3, 9 through 13. Or is this a reference to the removal of the old covenant, the law of Moses, and bringing in the new covenant and the law of Christ, which includes within it the eternal kingdom, the church, which he's going on to say, we have received a kingdom which cannot be moved. I believe that second one fits the context, but however, certainly our minds, and maybe even their minds, would go to the end of the world, in which all of the physical world, everything that has been made, will be destroyed, will be burnt up when Jesus returns. But using the prophetic language that was used by Haggai, there is a reference to the removal of that earthly law of Moses and a bringing in of that heavenly and spiritual and eternal new covenant of Christ in his kingdom and his church. And so he says he's impressing upon them the need to continuing to be faithful to Christ, continuing to be a faithful member of the body of Christ, and reminding them how great of an opportunity that they have in living at this time in history so that they can serve Christ.